Very good. So let's go ahead and begin. People are starting to join even more now, but it's a good time. We'll do our introductions. My name is Brian Clendenin. I am with Datadog Canada. I'm located here in Vancouver, British Columbia. We're delighted to have joining us folks from both Amazon Web Services and Valtix. James, why don't we introduce yourself first?
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. My name is James Armitage. I'm a Principal Security Solutions Architect with AWS. I work with our public sector customers all across Canada, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And it's actually really nice to join Brian, Jay, and Eddie today to talk about observability and security on AWS. Eddie, Jay?
Hi, my name is Jay Hardwick. I'm Director of Sales over at Valtix. Pleasure to be here.
Good morning. My name is Eddie Tang. I'm the Systems Engineering Director here at Valtix. Pleasure to be here.
That's great.
So today we're going to be talking about accelerating cloud adoption for the public sector and ensuring that security is built into that journey as well. And so we're delighted to have both Valtix and AWS hosting this session today. And we're going to kind of kick it off with James Armitage, who has a wealth of knowledge and brings that to the table today from both not just a cloud perspective, but a security perspective, along with having a background in the public sector here in Canada. A few housekeeping items today. So the session is being recorded, which we will make sure that gets sent out to all of the attendees. And also during the session today, if you would like to ask any questions, you'll notice down in the lower bottom, there is a Q&A box. Please post all of your questions in the Q&A, as that will be where we'll look for those questions as opposed to the chat features that you see in Zoom. With that, let's kick it over and start with James to kind of give us that level set on cloud in the Canadian public sector.
All right, thank you. And one last note on the Q&A, we're also going to make sure to leave some time at the very end. So if we're not able to get to your questions on the way through the presentation today, we're certainly going to leave some time at the end for a little bit more of a free-form discussion. It has been my pleasure to work with Amazon for over a year now as a security advisor for our public sector customers. And in a really, a wonderfully privileged position, I work with all layers of government, education, healthcare. And over again, one of the things that comes up is getting observability, getting security in hand so that you can move forward with confidence. And this will inform your security posture, your risk posture, how you perform a privacy impact assessment, and really importantly, how you maintain day-to-day operations as you start to evolve into a cloud-based operating model. To that end, I think it's pretty important that while we're talking about moving into cloud and helping accelerate public sector adoption, we think about what Amazon often refers to as the shared responsibility model. Now, when you're working with a traditional on-premises environment, you are responsible for everything end to end. That's your physical premises, the locks on the doors, the racks, the power, everything all the way through to replacing faulty memory modules, upgrading your operating system, patching. The entire spectrum is within your realm of responsibility. As you start working with cloud service providers and our partners, you'll find that there is a shared responsibility model. And it's really important to parse how the shared responsibility model works. So with Amazon, we are responsible for the security of the cloud. And you'll see in the orange inset across the bottom, we'll manage identity and access management as a service. But just above that, it is our customer's responsibility to configure that identity and access management, to allocate the permissions that they need for their operational success. Amazon is responsible for our regions, our availability zones, our edge locations. This is the physical infrastructure that we offer, as well as the compute and storage. But in this example, which is more or less aligned with infrastructure as a service, if you install an operating system, you're responsible for the patching, the user level account controls, any third-party software you want to install, and all the way up the rest of the stack. I think that's familiar to a lot of people because you're used to it working with software as a service already. But shared responsibility model is a little more nuanced than that because it is not a static thing. It's actually a bit of a spectrum depending on the services you consume. So our infrastructure services, such as EC2, virtual machines, all the way through to our abstracted services, like our simple storage service, which is an object-based storage. Abstracted services, you're mostly going to use via an API. There's less direct management for you, but you still have a broad amount of control through configuration management. You'll control your encryption, but we'll take care of the balance of the service. The reason I point this out is that when you're building on AWS, you're generally going to use multiple different services. And those multiple services are going to have different shared responsibility models. And you'll notice in the top right corner here that part of this shared responsibility model is how you use and work really closely with other third parties and software vendors, just like Datadog and Valtix. So as you're building for success, keep in mind the shared responsibility model and take a look at how consuming managed services can actually improve your security posture, but be cognizant of that shared responsibility model. When you know who's responsible for what, a lot of this gets easier, and that, that becomes, I think, a real blocker remover for accelerating your cloud journey. It's getting your grasp on how this model works, because you'll be able to come up to speed much more quickly with partners as well as your cloud service provider. That leads directly into, once you've got shared responsibility and you start to build, you're going to want observability into your environment. And observability on AWS can be accomplished through so many different options and paths. I think all of the customers I talk to have, a really vastly growing need to analyze the data that's coming through, and it grows exponentially. And as you move through your cloud journey and start consuming more and more managed services, you're going to find that observability becomes a slightly different and interesting challenge. And you're going to find that the more data you collect, the more ways you can use it. And it becomes a bit of a flywheel effect, whereas the inputs go in, you start gathering speed and momentum. To that end, you'll have a whole bunch of different use cases, and you'll end up trying to choose how you want to build and where you want to consume as a managed service. And this is where I think Datadog really starts to have a lot of additional capacity for you, because there's pre-built views, especially, and I'll let Brian speak about this in a moment. I have no intention of hogging the microphone today. I think that there's a lot of use cases where you're going to choose where it makes sense to build and where it makes sense to consume. And that comes up an awful lot. So while you're building out your use cases and your planning, think about the tooling you have, and the current challenges that I see a lot of our customers have are common ones that existed well before cloud came along, and will continue to be something in place unless you kind of change your operating model for observability. So whether you're using PowerShell, whether you're using grep, if you're using simple tooling, you're not going to get the full value out of your data. You're going to plow a lot of time into it, and that human time is actually very expensive, and it becomes a fragile enterprise architecture with a lot of technical debt built in. So to skip over that, consider using more advanced tools that can help you on that journey. This comes down to planning your observability. You have data, which can become information, which can become knowledge, and from knowledge you can drive insight, and from insight you can take action. And you're going to have a variety of users who need to use this data. So your observability plan has to contemplate the data lifecycle all the way through action, and it has to consider the different stakeholders that you need in order to really take advantage of it. With that, Amazon has some built-in native tools, including CloudWatch metrics, CloudWatch logs, and AWS X-ray traces. These are different ways of getting observability in your environment, whether that is passing log data into our managed service, whether that is creating metrics and then alarms and actions on that, or X-ray, which is a way of getting application level intelligence on what's flowing through. But there's certainly more than one way to do that, and you can extend and build out further using other managed services. So, the way that a lot of our customers talk about monitoring and getting observability is that they're going to operate hybrid for a long time in the public sector, and that you'll have Amazon inputs and on-premises inputs, and you can send that into CloudWatch if you choose. You can generate metrics of a variety of amounts. I mean, you can do this on hours per week or CPU. You can build customs. You can do math on this. You can generate alarms, and you can send those alarms to different places. And this is probably very familiar because you've done this on-premise for a long time with other products and services. And you can build out automation and orchestration. You can integrate that with third-party paging and metrics. And you can see that Amazon provides this rich depth and breadth of services for you to build out and do this all yourself. But for a lot of our customers, it makes sense to pass this data through to an ISV and have integrations there. You are more than welcome to build. One of the biggest things about Amazon is we give our customers the freedom to build any which way they choose. And as you're building, if you want to accelerate that, you might want to think about consuming through an ISV at the same time and finding the best path for you. You know, with that, I think it's probably a really good idea for me to pass off to our partner at Datadog. Brian, would you like to pick it up from there?
Sounds good. Thank you. Share my screen here. So one of the goals that I'm going to be having today is to kind of give you that high-level overview of Datadog and what we mean by a unified observability platform in the context of cloud computing. So if we think about what's happening today, there's really a new kind of paradigm that's been creating this chaos and complexity with moving from the on-premise world and into the hybrid environment and even cloud and multi-cloud environments. So if we look at that, over time, you know, we've gone from a world where we had few vendor suites, monolithic applications, and moving that to lots of open source and SaaS and type microservices applications. You know, if you think about it from a number of computing nodes, for example, we've had physical hardware. And as public sector organizations are starting to move into the cloud and take advantages that it has there, they're also starting to have more complex workloads, things such as containers and serverless and microservices. If you think about, you know, microservices, a good example might be Uber. Like, what did Uber develop? Absolutely nothing. They're getting all of their services from their mapping technology from Google, their text messaging from Twilio, and they've created via APIs the service. But with that comes scale and complexity and compute nodes. And so if we think about that cloud transformation journey, over time, you'll see that, you know, when you start that planning from the on-prem servers, this upper line talks about the instance lifespan. So traditionally, you might have the depreciation of several 3 to 5 years and how that might work. But as we start to get into more cloud first and even more cutting edge serverless functions and serverless, those instances and the ephemeral environments, the dynamic nature of them are much quicker, shorter lifespans, but that also makes it more difficult to monitor. So that's where solutions like Datadog start to really drive value for a lot of our customers. So what is Datadog? So Datadog was founded in 2010 under a very simple premise that the two founders, they both worked at the same organization. One was the director of engineering, the other was the director of IT operations. And while they got along, sometimes their teams did not when outages started to occur. And so they actually built Datadog as a collaboration tool so that their teams could work from one single source of truth to be able to reduce mean time to detection, reduce mean time to repair. And it's a fully SaaS platform. And by platform, by definition, means it's something that you can build upon. So over the years, we started to add, starting out with infrastructure monitoring, fully featured application performance monitoring tools, log management, user experience management, things such as synthetics and real user monitoring, network performance, and security monitoring. And today, around the globe, we have over 11,000 customers. I think our market cap valuation just here has gone up to about $25 billion, which really is a testament to what's occurring in the market. And that is the idea of moving from siloed user experience to a platform that allows you to do seamless correlation of what James was talking about between metrics, traces, and logs. And so because of that, organizations can start to solve really significant common challenges that many have today that we see. Often the triage process when you're doing infrastructure monitoring, application monitoring, and logging is very cumbersome and complex. And that's by no fault of organizations of their own. Over time, it has just built up. You might have different departments going to choose different monitoring tools. Well, this has really started to create silos. And silos then will start to create more time to resolution because of the cumbersome process, because there's no way to do seamless correlation between events and metrics and logs. And so we're seeing a lot of things such as current monitoring practice lack that holistic view across infrastructure and applications, through to platforms that, they're not being able to have a unified view. When you can't see from one single UI, one platform, if you will, that makes it very difficult during the trouble resolution process. So we're really trying to create, how do we help teams be more collaborative in nature so that they're more not only efficient, but effective in how they monitor the health of applications and infrastructure throughout that organization. And if we think about digital transformation for the public sector, what does that kind of look like? You could almost distill it into three things. It's democratizing observability. It's being able to apply to these ephemeral environments that organizations are starting to utilize to do and deliver better citizen services, as well as removing silos between teams and departments. And often when organizations are coming to Datadog, you're seeing a few common things here. Their current states are often, they'll have disparate monitoring tools in place. We've had many that are, between 12 and 15 different monitoring tools, up to working with one client that has almost 60 different monitoring tools today, which by nature of that, there's going to be a lot of manual processes that they would want to be able to automate in the future. Often applications are not monitored, but more often than not, they're having challenges monitoring modern technologies. So things such as containers and Kubernetes and Lambdas. And this idea that I've mentioned prior about the siloed connection and user experience. So whether you are in IT operations or application development, those could create silos when there's different tools being utilized. And so the negative consequences to this are, it's typically slower to adopt new technologies. There's usually delayed responses when there are customer impacting issues and outages. And so from a future state perspective, what we're seeing in the market generally across virtually every industry is that they're looking for that single pane of glass that allows them to see across their applications and infrastructure so that teams can collaborate more effectively. And also start to build automation into the application development process, like putting monitoring into your CI/CD pipelines. And then lastly, what are those business outcomes? Faster time to market. The dev and ops teams are being able to use the same platform. You'll be able to now adopt more modern technologies such as serverless and containers to get the value out of those areas. And so then if we think about where does Datadog add tremendous value, we really collect all of the data from your servers, your containers, applications, and cloud-based services with one single unified agent. And that's quite unique. Gartner said that we are one of the few vendors out there today that provide a single agent architecture, which really aids in that ease of deployment, ease of use, and ease of maintenance. And so because it's a fully SaaS platform, it allows us to deliver all of these capabilities here with the same agent. So that agent that's collecting all the infrastructure monitoring from your backend servers and cloud-based services is also collecting the APM on the server side, which gives you insights into all the aggregated information across all the requests. And then through to log management. So log management is telling you what exactly happened when something goes wrong. And when you have that single pane of glass, this is where the collaboration piece really starts to come into play, so that the development team can speak with the IT operations team, security, and even the business, all on that same single source of truth for that matter. And so why Datadog? Really it's about unified observability, an integrated platform that can be used by everyone. There is no custom query language with Datadog, so you don't need to be a specialist like in many other solutions out there today. It is really meant to be used by a wide range of folks throughout your organization. It's cloud agnostic. So we know that there's gonna, as James mentioned, there's gonna be a period of time where there's hybrid, on-prem and cloud, and then even multi-cloud in some instances. And we wanna make sure that we're meeting the needs of all customers depending on their unique circumstances. Ease of use. OOTV stands for out-of-the-box integrations. So we have over 400 out-of-box integrations that are supported and maintained by Datadog. And this really reduces the risk for our customers because we make sure that they're working as opposed to having a third party or the actual other vendor maintaining those integrations. So the time to value then is measured in seconds and minutes and not days and months. Logging without limits, I'll talk more about this in a moment. We really do something very unique in the market where we've decoupled ingestion from indexing. And I've had a couple of CIOs tell me that, Brian, this will save us a small fortune in how you're doing logging today relative to some of the incumbent solutions that they were utilizing. Superior granularity and retention. By default, we measure everything for every 15 seconds and keep it for 15 months so that you can take into effect any seasonality scenarios that you may have in play within your organization. And then lastly, data-driven, we like to call it actionable alerting, because many of our customers come to us and say, we have alert fatigue. We get so many alerts, we just feel it's just an inbox filler and we don't know where to focus. Well, we want to make sure that when you do get an alert, and if it's going to that on-call engineer at 2 a.m., that if they're being woken up, it's for a reason, and then they know how to action that to fix it. And so that's where we kind of get into machine learning and being able to do predictive modeling so that you can resolve an issue before it becomes business impacting. So let me switch for a moment here to Datadog and AWS. So there's a few reasons why AWS customers really love Datadog. First of all, Datadog is one of the largest consumers of AWS around the globe. And it's really, Datadog is built for that AWS hybrid and multi-cloud environments. And when I talk about future-proof, that's meaning that when you start to move to more of those dynamic workloads, ephemeral environments, that Datadog has you covered. We're extremely fast to work with. So implementations are again measured in minutes and hours, not days and months because it's a fully SaaS platform. We do offer 14-day free trials that allow you to get a sense and so that you can see for yourself the power of the platform. And then it's unified. You don't want to take if you're doing monitoring today and you kind of think of it as a messy house, you don't want to then move it to a new provider and still have that mess. That's where you always want to think about a unified, seamless correlation so that you can then resolve issues and outages faster so they're not business impacting. Automated, I talked about this in terms of actionable alerting, machine learning, driving intelligence across the platform through a tag-based model. Tag-based model, can kind of think about it as that metadata that helps you to do parsing and searching in a quick and easy way. And then from a support model, we always want to make sure that, not from engineering support, but a customer success team that's one of the best in the globe, so that ensure our customers have a stellar experience. And so from those out of the box, we have over 77 different AWS supported services today, which is among the highest in the industry. And so if you think about, just to give you a quick view, we often also do what we call proof of values. But to give you a sense of what the platform looks like, what you're seeing here is that kind of bird's eye view of a host. And it's currently being color coded by CPU utilization. And so you are able to drill down into these hexagons, if you will, that are what's going on in that host so that you can take actionable insights. On top of that, we talk about logs. And so logging is very important when you want to overlay that to your infrastructure hosts so that you can actually know what's happening. The infrastructure is the infrastructure doing what it's supposed to do? The logging is telling you, well, what happened when an issue arose. And so that's where we get into what we call logging without limits. Logging without limits is the idea of not having blind spots within your organization. So often customers are forced to make a choice due to costs with logging solutions out there today, that everything that you ingest, you are also having to index and pay for. So the unique thing that Datadog did, as I mentioned, is that we've decoupled ingestion from indexing. So we want you to index only the logs that you deem valuable. So we allow you to ingest everything. For those that have different levels of value to your own organization, you can archive those into your AWS environment and rehydrate them later if you need to do any root cause analysis. This is where it can save a small fortune to customers because logs inherently do have different value. And by taking this approach, you're going to be able to reduce blind spots, but also save costs as well. So at the end of the day, Datadog for public sector organizations reduces and solves for complexity, you know, from the core to the edge. The core being your infrastructure, the edge being IoT. As we start to put more connected devices out there in the world to help keep citizens moving, how are those providers that you're choosing for your monitoring can cover you from end to end? And that's kind of the overview of Datadog. So I'll reconvene here at the end and we'll talk about how our ways customers and organizations being able to get a feel for Datadog. So with that, I am going to turn this over now to Jay because we're actually back over to James. And we're going to talk about the security aspects because we work with some of the most highly regulated and security-minded organizations. We want to make sure that security is top of mind and built right into your planning. James?
Thanks, Brian. I think I'd like to pick up on some of the things that you were talking about there because they're really relevant as our customers are going on their cloud journey. And one of the bigger ones, you touched on it, was the observability that leads to cross-team collaboration and moving a little faster. And with that, you're really increasing your security agility, your organizational agility. This is something new. It is one of the main drivers that I see for cloud adoption, where organizations are looking, once they get a feel for having that unified observability and being able to see all layers of infrastructure, they get a lot more insight on how to secure it and how to move forward with it. You know, a very brief background on some of the security theory that I think all customers would really benefit from on AWS. We have a framework called the Cloud Adoption Framework. And for every public sector customer who's contemplating moving over to AWS, and I encourage you to do that, is to read our Cloud Adoption Framework. And it comprises 6 different perspectives that are really a unified view. So this is, you know, in terms of observability, rather than observability of your IT stack, this is observability of your enterprise transformation and evolution. One perspective in particular that I spend a lot of time on is the security perspective. And the visibility that Datadog gives you and the actionability is really important when you think about how you're going to integrate with other security tooling, such as firewalls, intrusion detection, alerting. You know, those alerts can be operational, but those can be security alerts as well. Now, we have 4 major controls that we recommend our customers take a look at: a directive, preventative, detective, and responsive model. And this is highly aligned with the NIST cybersecurity framework, if that's a framework that's familiar to you, but it's really meant to encompass the entire spectrum. Now, those controls can be applied through a variety of cloud native services. And we have a whole host of services. I won't run through every single icon on this list, and this is loosely categorized. Again, just like our customers have freedom to build any observability capability that they would like on AWS, we can do the same thing for you with security tooling. But to accelerate your cloud journey, there's a lot of cases where it makes sense to pick up and use a managed service and learn how to build as you go, right? So when you're thinking about accelerating your journey to cloud, the ability to leapfrog over some of the lessons learned and slowly build in is something that's pretty powerful for a lot of the customers that I deal with, right? There's always going to be a certain amount of trade-off between build versus buy. And as you contemplate where you want to build and where you want to buy, keep in your crosshairs that we have a cloud adoption framework that's going to give you some guidance around what your transformation can look like, and you can figure out where your effort is best spent. Now, as you go through the observability, the collaboration, and the decision of build versus buy, you're going to discover that basically your rate of change increases, that your on-premise model towards IT was lower frequency of change. And as you go to cloud, and you had touched on introducing alerting into your DevSecOps pipeline, introducing alerting into metrics and traces, that's going to increase your rate of change. And what that does is it changes, what you were doing, how the work was modeled and where that collaboration goes, and teams start to span across multiple different areas. And so, in particular for firewalls, it goes from being just the firewall team involved in making changes to your developers have a stake in this, your DBAs have a stake. All those other teams it becomes a matrix organization much more quickly than I think a lot of people realize once they get their feel for it. And so those silos go away. And at Amazon, we talk a lot about using a two-pizza team, a smaller, agile team that has ownership over the product that they're building. And that ownership extends into the observability, but it extends into the security as well. It goes from buying a software package that is fairly monolithic to, how do you implement and how do you implement quickly? And you can do that with SaaS, and you can also deploy a lot of software via the Amazon Marketplace. And so your procurement cycle goes to a one-click deploy. And I think Jay and Eddie are probably going to have something to talk about on that front, in terms of where this change comes in. I think, out of a lot of the guidance that we give to our customers when they start getting ready to make a change and reasonably anticipate that there's going to be a higher frequency of change, it's that last point there, to build it in and not bolt it on. Try and use cloud native services and cloud native vendors where it makes the most sense, right? And that's, I think, a really important topic, is that this becomes integrated. This should not be an exercise in recreating silos. You talked about, don't carry over the mess of what you have and try and build net new and be organized in it. Well, I think a lot of this goes to when you're procuring SaaS, when you're procuring things through our independent software vendors, ISVs, build it in. Make it part of your architecture, and you'll really yield the benefits of it, and that will help accelerate your transformation. So, I think before I get to any closing thoughts, what I'd like to do is hand this over to Jay and to Eddie so that they can talk about Valtix and how that kind of meshes with both Datadog and AWS.
Thank you, James. Eddie, do you want to put the presentation? Thank you. So thank you, everybody, for joining this call, and I want to thank Datadog and Amazon for letting us participate. Obviously, Valtix is a fairly young brand amongst these two giants, and so this is a very exciting webinar for us. So before we get into the technology, I thought I'd introduce the company to everybody because we are a young brand. The company and what we deliver is a SaaS advanced network security product. The company was founded by these three gentlemen, Vishal Jain, Vijay Chandra, and Praveen Patnala. And really quickly, I think it's really important to understand their backgrounds because you almost needed all three of these gentlemen to come together to build a Valtix. Vishal and Vijay have been working together for over 20 years. They have built technologies such as the ACI technology owned by Cisco, the Nexus 9000 technologies, both of which are multi-billion-dollar product lines. And their last roles were co-founding Passando Systems with John Chambers. And on the right side, you have Praveen Patnala, who spent the last decade of his life in cloud, starting off with AWS, and then his last role before building Valtix was helping lead the design of the Google Cloud Controller. And these gentlemen founded Valtix in 2018, so we're coming up on our 3rd-year anniversary. And the idea is that they found they identified a big gap in the marketplace. So when we think about advanced network security, before Valtix, you really had two options. And Eddie, if you want to blow up the slide, that'd be great. The first option, and this is something that Valtix is very, what we recommend is that you as a client consume as much as possible the native AWS security tools available to you. And the reason being is that these tools are extremely agile. But these are what we consider the first step. And if you need more advanced security beyond what they can provide, AWS will recommend that you go to their marketplace. And in the past, a client would typically go to one of our multi-billion-dollar competitors, and that was, Palo Alto or Cisco or F5 or Imperva and Checkpoint, et cetera. And these vendors, they provide a very, very good security posture to the marketplace. Unfortunately, what they ask a client to do is create a virtual appliance in the cloud. And this is a very difficult task. And these products are very, very rigid. They were designed for the on-premise world where it's a lot easier to create a moat around that world versus the cloud world, which is continuous nature and always changing. This is a very difficult proposition. And thus, this is a gap that our founders identified. We have the background to develop a best-in-class security posture but one that moves at the speed of cloud, one that is extremely simple to both deploy and to use after the fact. And this is the gap that we're solving for. Now, before we pass on to Eddie, I actually wanted to ask James if he'd talk about the security landscape in AWS today.
Sure thing. So, you know, I think some of the key guidance that we give our customers, and you've got it right there on the slide, is to set up guardrails and not gates. And a guardrail is something that keeps you from going off the road. And a gate is very much a stop and go mechanism. And some of the guardrails we offer through things like AWS organizations or things like service control policies, identity and access management permission boundaries. You know, these are technical controls you can put in place. They're preventative controls, and they're extremely robust. And that is always one of the first things that we recommend that our customers do on their journey. And then beyond that, in the cloud adoption framework, which I've touched on briefly, and I'll definitely come back to in our closing discussion, you know, we have 5 core security epics. And one of those is infrastructure protection. And, you know, so in that lower section there, in terms of building out your security posture and your security maturity, you need observability, you need actionability, you need to have a detection and a response plan. All these things are part and parcel of getting to where you have reached a reasonable security posture to help you accelerate your cloud journey. We have a service called Guard Duty, which is an intrusion detection service that operates on several different layers within your AWS tenancy. We have a tool called Security Hub, which allows you to coalesce visibility from a variety of AWS native tools into one view that you can then take action on and chain activity from there. I think your point there about going beyond the basics is really important. So there's a whole series of basic and foundational security best practices that we recommend our customers take on. And to your point, Jay, AWS has this depth and breadth of services that I think is unparalleled in the cloud service provider space. But there are always going to be customers who want to continue to expand their capability. And you're absolutely right. We have so many partners in the marketplace that become a very easy deployment and scaling mechanism for our customers to take on and get a little even further along their cloud journey. And so when I was talking about that build versus buy for observability, I think the exact same is true in terms of build versus buy for how you want to accelerate your cloud security journey.
Great, thank you very much, James. Yeah, so I'll provide an overview of Valtix here. So as Jay touched on, Valtix delivers advanced network security for your applications that are hosted in public clouds. So we take a 3D approach to delivering that service: discover, deploy, and defend. Now Valtix, as Jay touched on again, is as a service. It is we built around a cloud native architecture with built-in auto scaling, and we deliver the service in a usage-based model. Today, we have customers in a variety of verticals. You know, we have healthcare organizations leveraging our product, financial services, and customers that are delivering SaaS to their customers are using their product to secure their applications. And we're certainly not limited to these verticals. We have organizations that use us from larger enterprise kind of profile and also kind of mid-market customers, and they value different aspects of the Valtix offering. So certainly want to ensure that everyone's aware that it's, you know, we have a breadth of use cases that seem to apply to not one specific vertical. Now, going deeper into the discover, deploy, defend approach, we truly believe that in public cloud, you need, in order to secure your applications, you need to be able to understand, you know, what's out there. And because of the dynamic nature of cloud, what we did was build a really robust discovery mechanisms. So we're integrated with the AWS APIs to provide a evergreen model of the assets that you have in your AWS accounts that are relevant to applying advanced network security. So you think about constructs like load balancers and VPCs, subnets, security groups. All those are things that we consistently take an inventory of. And what's important about our discovery capability is that we're delivering actionable discovery. So we're taking in this inventory, providing this evergreen model of your cloud environments, And then based on that discovery, we then apply security policies. So that goes into the deploy aspect of our platform. So as we touched on, we are a SaaS-based control plane, so SaaS portal to define your security policies and your AWS accounts. And we can do one-click deployment of Valtix Cloud, auto-scaling cloud firewalls into your AWS accounts through the interactive model, doing so interactively through the Valtix portal, or doing it programmatically through the Valtix Terraform resource provider. So for organizations that wish to automate or include as part of their CI/CD pipeline, we have the capability to do an end-to-end deployment of Valtix to secure your applications. From a defense perspective, what we're doing is orchestrating the deployment of Valtix auto-scaling cloud firewalls into your AWS accounts. And the services that our customers are looking for we have a wide variety of services, TLS decryption and re-encryption, layer 7 WAF, deep packet inspection with intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, and data loss prevention capabilities, and URL filtering around, outbound access and ensuring that your assets are reaching to the appropriate internet-based resources. So we talked to a number of customers, and they're all looking for this comprehensive capability that are typically, delivered by a myriad of vendors. And what we've done is we've innovated by building a high-performance, multi-threaded, single-pass inspection pipeline designed for public cloud. Right. So this is certainly a huge piece of our innovation that we deliver to the market. Now, Brian touched on this. We have, a lot of organizations as they deploy in public cloud are leveraging tag-based identity, right? Defining cloud assets based on tagging. So we certainly support what customers are accustomed to with IP or subnet or CIDR-based, security policies, but increasingly we're seeing customers leverage tag-based security policies, or is what AWS calls attribute-based access controls. And I'll certainly go into more of an example of that in a moment. Fundamentally, if Valtix as a technical architecture, we're a software-defined model. As I touched on, our control plane is delivered by SaaS. So this is a web portal that Valtix manages, where customers would be defining their security policies. And based on the security policies and the accounts that they wish to, and the assets that they wish to secure, what Valtix will do is orchestrate and deploy Valtix cloud firewalls into the customer's AWS accounts. And we use a cross-account IAM role to be able to deploy that. And we certainly work with customers to scope those IAM policies appropriately and deploy into the customer's accounts. Now, you see that we have different models of deployment. We have distributed model where a customer may start off with an AWS account. They have an application they wish to secure in a VPC. So we'll go ahead and orchestrate the deployment of Valtix cloud firewalls into that AWS account. Now, increasingly, as customers start to deploy more and more applications, we're going to see is customers deploying multiple accounts, multiple VPCs. And in this scenario, they may want to deploy a centralized security model where they deploy a security services VPC in a particular AWS account, where they're inspecting traffic through this centralized model. And in this model, increasingly what we're seeing is customers deploying transit gateway to connect the variety of VPCs that your application owners may have assets in. And then with Valtix, we allow the customer to orchestrate the deployment of this transit gateway and the security services VPC and all the associated infrastructure. So think about transit gateway attachments, transit gateway routing tables, and ensuring that the flow of traffic coming from these application VPCs, traverse the security services VPC for inspection. So depending on your customer environment, you may already have an existing transit gateway where we can integrate into, or you may start fresh with the greenfields deployment. Valtix can integrate and help orchestrate a variety of different deployment models. You'll see that in this diagram, we're also integrated with S3 and KMS for things like threat-based packet captures to S3 and KMS integration for key management. You'll notice that all of this is retained within the account boundaries of your customer account. So none of your keys or potential PII data ever leaves that and goes to the cloud controller. As it's an important distinction I want to make here, that no network traffic for these applications are traversing from your accounts to the cloud controller. And purely policy and telemetry from the control plane to the data plane is traversing to the cloud controller. As you can see, the cloud controller retains the telemetry and monitoring, and that's where our integrations with Datadog provide you that comprehensive visibility, not just in a silo technology from a logging perspective, but being able to give you a comprehensive look, across using a dashboard across your infrastructure. Now, which deployment model makes sense? Well, it really depends on what stage of your journey you're in. We see organizations deploy Valtix Gateway in secure islands where they may have application owners and they don't necessarily, they want to maybe deploy Valtix Gateways to inspect traffic that are incoming and outgoing from these VPCs. So that is a model we absolutely support. We see increasingly enterprises deploy in a centralized security model from an organizational perspective. They could perhaps have application owners own VPCs, but they need a centralized team to do inspection of the traffic that is coming and going from your AWS environment. And in this scenario, we see organizations deploy in well-architected frameworks with control tower, to provide the governance that these organizations require. And a part of that may be the deployment of a transit VPC in a separate AWS account where one of the organizations may be responsible for this, this transit gateway and the security VPC. So we've seen this type of increasingly enterprises start to deploy in this type of fashion. And of course, we support a hybrid model for those organizations that perhaps, as an example, do ingress or inbound inspection of traffic at these application VPCs, and then they wish to centralize the inspection of traffic going outbound. So with that, I'd love to hear, James, you've talked to a number of clients over the past year and longer. What do you see organizations, and what part of the journey are they in, and what type of deployment models are you seeing out there?
So I think that you've touched on something really interesting here. The secure islands all the way through a centralized and distributed security, and the variety of deployment options you have is really healthy, because a lot of our customers will begin with a couple development accounts, ones and twos, maybe a few people open it with a credit card, maybe some credits through attending an Amazon or a partner related event. And they start experimenting and just getting their feet wet with the cloud. And as they progress on their journey and they discover that they want to accelerate their adoption, inevitably they're going to come across our prescriptive guidance around having a multi-account strategy. And that multi-account strategy exists because accounts are such a good isolation boundary that can be employed, a really strong and robust way of differentiating between cost allocation, between permissions. And so, those secure islands, they often come up when you're dealing with a specific workload deployed within a single account. But as you start to move towards a multi-account strategy, that centralized security becomes more and more common, as dedicated accounts for security, for incident response, for auditing and logging are furnished into what generally you'll hear Amazon refer to as a landing zone. Now, you've touched on the transit gateway, which I think is a really interesting feature, and it calls back to what I was saying around, finding ways to build this in, build your security in, rather than just trying to bolt it on as an overlay. And so absolutely integrating with the transit gateway, with KMS, with visibility on S3, that's a really good example of building things in. So once customers realize that, building native for the cloud does not involve consuming just purely cloud services, but through our partners, that's where really the acceleration of that journey begins. So the centralized and distributed security, I think, is that is when you have created a landing zone, or perhaps you're using our service called Control Tower, but you have a multi-account strategy firmly in hand, and that segregation and separation of duties makes sense. And so all of these cover the whole spectrum of customers as they're adopting cloud.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that perspective, James. Really appreciate that. So I did touch on kind of leveraging tags, and Brian touched on it with respect to Datadog as well. This is, attribute-based access controls. This is, defining a particular entity, say an instance in this example that I have here, where I've defined its role. So it's a web server of some sort in an environment that's prod, and based on that tagging scheme, I've now applied a security policy that defines what it can and cannot do. And in this example, perhaps it's a web prod instance that allows write access to a PII S3 bucket. And part of the security controls is, from an advanced network security perspective, is we want to ensure that there's no access to a personal bucket. So what this kind of posture provides is the ability to ensure that, even though this instance has write access to a PII bucket, that we're not exfiltrating data to a personal bucket. And what we're protecting against, say, is a compromise to that particular instance to prevent those type of situations from happening, right? So we're layering on security. So as you certainly have the IAM and bucket policies to ensure that the right people or right resources have access to the right data, but we're adding an extra layer of security from an advanced network perspective to ensure that these type of exfiltrations don't happen. Now, beyond just the security policy of being able to, define a method of read-write, we certainly have the ability to apply a number of different controls as well with respect to URL filtering, being able to do deep packet inspection to ensure that we're not ingesting malware, for example, or that, doing data loss prevention of data in motion. So you may be using Macy from an S3 perspective, but for the data that's flowing through the network, we can do deep packet inspection to ensure that, based on the patterns of the data that we're seeing, that we're not potentially exfiltrating some valuable or key customer data. I think Valtix, what we believe is that to have a very good solution today, we need to be able to work really well with integration partners and ecosystem partners. And of course, we went at length of our integrations with AWS from a discovery, and also being able to deploy our Valtix cloud firewalls into AWS programmatically through APIs, but also from an integration perspective for threat logs and system logs, our partners here at Datadog to provide more comprehensive logging instead of logging into kind of silos of different technologies. From a management perspective, we certainly have the ability to leverage the Valtix portal, which is fundamentally built as an API first platform, and also customers that want to, as I mentioned, incorporate into CI/CD pipelines. We have the ability to deploy end-to-end via Terraform. In fact, we recently completed a project with a healthcare organization where we were able to deliver from a scratch SaaS controller to fully inspecting an application, internet-facing application, in 3.5 minutes through deployment through Terraform. And then from an alerting perspective, today we have integrations with PagerDuty and ServiceNow and any kind of webhook service. But because we're a SaaS platform, again, to touch on what Brian talked about, having a SaaS platform gives us the flexibility to be able to add these integrations very quickly to our platform. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the three main use cases that customers are deploying for Valtix. And increasingly, we're seeing this being our big use case, beachhead use case, is around egress. Organizations wanting to ensure that their outbound traffic going to the internet are going to the right places. And in this example, I'm demonstrating the centralized security model where we have an AWS Transit Gateway and a Valtix Transit VPC, where we've deployed Valtix cloud firewalls in, and we have these spoke VPCs that could potentially be in a number of different AWS accounts, where we want to ensure that the cloud asset there is, inspecting traffic for outbound access and going to the places that these instances should go to. So an example of this may be pulling in software updates through GitHub, and you can apply URL filtering controls that allow it only to go to your company's GitHub repository, as an example. So for some other organizations, they may need integrations with third parties. So you may have an application that requires connecting to a third-party payment gateway, as an example. So applying controls to ensure that it's only going to the appropriate payment gateways. is important to some other customers as well. And certainly being able to have the fine-grained granularity to allow specific types of methods to be called as other controls that we also support as well. Along with that, organizations also want the breadth of capability to do data loss prevention, for example, and also ensuring that your assets are going out to the right places, but also when they're inspecting traffic, as it goes out and reaches out, that you're not pulling in malware, right? And also applying controls, obviously, via the application ID. Another use case that customers use us for is around ingress, or I'm protecting a web-facing application. And increasingly, we're seeing customers deploy, not only just the standard application load balancer in front of a 3-tiered application, but also applications delivered using Kubernetes or container-based applications through EKS as an example. And here we have an example of being able to do SNI routing, to be able to have a Valtix cluster front-ending multiple applications and using SNI to be able to route the traffic to the appropriate applications on the back end, and applying security policies, delivering L7 advanced WAF capabilities. You're covering not only the OWASP top 10 core rule sets, but also advanced TrustWave rule sets for web framework specific security controls. For the non-HTTP based applications, we have intrusion prevention IDS IPS for malware detect as well as part of these signatures, and also applying controls to ensure that specific geo-based IPs are allowed to access these applications. Also, subscription to malicious source IPs is another capability that we deliver around ingress. We also have an integration with Route 53 that allows us to make it really simple to update domain names to point to the Valtix gateway as part of this application deployment model for ingress. The third use case that we typically see is around east-west inspection. So we're increasingly beyond Kubernetes and beyond those type of applications, we see applications that are deployed via Lambda functions, perhaps fronted by API gateway. And with Valtix being in the path, we can inspect that traffic going to these platform as a service offerings, such as other kind of use cases around Dynamo and also RDS. And beyond that, we're seeing customers interested in securing traffic going from VPC to VPC between accounts, as an example. So through a transit gateway deployment model and centralized east-west inspection, we have the capability to be in the path of that inspection between resources, communicating between VPCs as well. Now, with all those use cases, I'm going to provide an example customer scenario. This is a federal financial services organization. They started off with AWS. It's very much like what James described, right? You started off with a few dev, an application in an account, and increasingly as they start to mature in their journey with AWS, they've decided to kind of start with a governance model, well-architected kind of deployment model with a multi-account strategy. They're using control tower, building landing zone, and part of that deployment, they wanted to look at the different options for applying advanced network security. And as a financial organization, they have a compliance need to do so. And their challenges were they were struggling with network security virtual appliances that were, for them, very complex to operate and scale. Right? They had no visibility into any of the changes that are happening in their cloud assets. And as many organizations are doing nowadays, looking for opportunities to lower the TCO. So we were introduced to this organization through a partner, and they evaluated Valtix. And what we did for them was they had an architectural diagram of their future state, and what we did was work with them to build a sandbox environment that mimicked their future state exactly. So they had a dual region deployment. They needed inspection, centralized inspection for ingress, egress, and east-west. And we helped them build that, 2-region deployment with transit gateway peering, and handed it to them. They got the experience that they desired, and then decided to move forward with us. So we're now deployed with them in that exact scenario with the 2-region deployment via transit gateway. And having, I think one of the big differentiators for our product is our ability to do the cloud inventory and discovery in relatively real time for any of the dynamic, because of the dynamic nature of their cloud environment. So went through quite a lot, and just in summary, some of the key benefits that our customers value about the Valtix solution, obviously being cloud native, having the green sheet capability to build an architecture that, after listening to the challenges of many organizations and how they want advanced network security being delivered to them. It's a SaaS-based architecture, so things like auto scaling is extremely simple. Software updates, we take a very agile approach to software delivery, software updates, being able to do rule updates very quickly, being a consistent security posture. So because we have a SaaS-based control plane, it gives us the ability to decouple the security policies from the cloud-based firewalls that we have deployed. So you can define consistent security posture and deploy it across your organization in multiple regions and accounts. We obviously, one of the big value propositions of our product is our ability to scale and be able to protect as organizations mature and they're potentially deploying hundreds of applications in a myriad of different AWS accounts. We have the ability to then deploy seamlessly across all of those different regions and applications. Advanced network security, I touched on this, being able to deliver all of these functionalities in a single solution. So talk to a number of customers in terms of the types of functions that they need and where we have an opportunity to lower TCO because now they're not procuring multiple products to deliver the same capability. Fast to deploy, very much like what Brian talked about, having a SaaS platform affords us the ability to deploy and get to value super quickly. So we're talking on the minutes to hours to be able to discover, deploy, and defend your applications. And we have a very flexible model in terms of licensing model. So I'll ask Jay to touch on that in just a moment. But because of all of this kind of feeds into the lower TCO, the fact that we're extremely friendly for organizations that are, have a DevOps CI/CD pipeline, they wish to use automation to deploy Valtix. We have this capability already built into the system where we can then, have smaller number of teams be able to manage a Valtix, deliver advanced network security for your applications. Now, with that, I'm going to ask Jay to touch on, the variable types of options that customers have to deploying Valtix. Jay?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. Real quick, so Valtix offers a very flexible licensing component to our business. It allows for elastic consumption, so it's very cloud friendly. And we recommend that all purchases be done on the AWS marketplace if possible. And we have two options. We have pay-as-you-go option, and we also have an enterprise option. And unlike our competitors who typically demand that you buy for peak, with Valtix, you can spin up and spin down as many instances of Valtix as you want at any point in the day. We track on a second-by-second basis. We charge by the hour. And so with pay-as-you-go, we invoice a client every month. Or if you choose enterprise, what we do is we sell a bundled amount of hours up front. And how fast you consume those hours is completely up to you. If you are interested in learning more, Eddie and I'd be happy to jump on a call with you. And we also offer no-cost proof of concepts to show you how it works. With that, I wanted to pass to James for a closing comments, who is going to talk about the AWS security priorities. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Jay. Jay, Eddie, Brian, you've all touched on, I think, some pretty key things around the cloud journey. The theme is there throughout, and it covers getting observability, getting security, and getting integration between your teams, and cross-functional integration between your products. And that really is the way to do cloud right. It is to take a look at all the opportunities that you have for automation, orchestration, integration, and put those together. That's a really good leading indicator of success as public sector and commercial start moving over to cloud. Now, one of the things that I had touched on was the cloud adoption framework and the security journey, and how you can align this to identifying, protecting, detecting, and coming up with a response and recovery plan for your security posture and just your operations as well. And there's all these different moving parts of building that comprehensive security and adoption approach. But notice that the green bar across the bottom spans all phases, all the major motions, and that's our service providers. You can use a variety of service providers and put them together as the building blocks to help you accelerate that cloud journey. I think it's important to consider each of the individual components individually, but if you want to move faster, finding opportunities to springboard ahead is a really, really good strategy to get your organization to where you want it to be. I don't want to overstate it, but I do want to be firm on this point that there are a lot of moving parts in any part of enterprise IT. And so where you can find ways to simplify that process, that's going to move you away from what Amazon would often refer to as undifferentiated heavy lifting of IT and of security, and moving your time to where it really matters to your business. In public sector, your business is typically serving citizen or consumer needs in one capacity or another. And that's really where your time is best spent. You know, we have a lot of key strategic indicators for success. I won't read them all, but I'll call out a few things here. The security cartography, you know, that's map making. That's getting observability of what's running, whether that's using the Datadog unified agent, whether that's using the Valtix cloud discovery. That's getting that visibility on what is running where. And as you're building out on cloud and you start to go on your journey from running just images on EC2 to starting to use microservices and serverless, that security cartography gets really important. And having a security operations playbook and runbook, I would expand that and say your infrastructure operations playbooks and runbooks as well. And once again, that's where the integrations between something like Valtix and Datadog make a lot of sense to me. Now, I've touched on this. Self-managing has, I think, a real element of hidden expense. Accurately capturing the total cost of operations and ownership for a lot of your business processes is non-trivial. Technical debt is pervasive in a bunch of different dimensions. It's important to accurately capture that, though, so that you can take a look at where your time is going and allocate those against what you would get as a managed service. The return on investment and the total cost of ownership are really, really important from being able to manage your IT strategy, your security strategy in particular. Year over year, we see constant pressures on budgets. I think everyone can reasonably anticipate that in the public sector, we've got this unusual situation in front of us right now. And so being able to capture all of that and account for it properly is important. And where you can save time, where you can save complexity, you're also going to be eliminating technical debt and some other parts of, I don't want to call it shadow IT, but shadow expense that you might not otherwise fully recognize and be able to treat. You know, the Amazon message here is really focus on doing what is special to you. Really deliver the core value of your organization and its mandate. And part of that is finding ways to innovate. And this is such an unusual thing for public sector to be able to start innovating at a pace that you've never seen before. And part of that innovation comes through unlocking observability and security that has been built in to your journey on the cloud. You know, migrate on your terms, but as you migrate, a lot of the customers I talk to start to realize the power of it. And all of those things, you will honestly reduce risk. And I'm happy to have these conversations with all of our customers around what quantifiable risk reduction looks like as you go to cloud. You know, with that, I'd like to open up for a Q&A and make sure that if there are any questions from our participants, more than happy to make sure that Eddie, Jay, and Brian, that you all have an opportunity to have a little bit of time to talk back.
Thanks, James. So at this time, I don't see any questions that we have right now coming in. We'll just give another minute on that. Enjoyed that session, Jay and Eddie and James. So we'll just give people a few moments to type any questions if they like. Okay, so I don't see any questions coming in. So with that, I want to thank Jay and Eddie from Valtix and James from Amazon Web Services for today's session of how the public sector in Canada can adopt cloud faster and securely. So there will be a recording of this session online, and we will make sure all of the attendees today receive their special lunch gift as communicated in the invitation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much, Brian, Jay, and Eddie.